You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Shane.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Owen.
And we've been naughty boys. And have we been doing our homework? Our gaming homework?
That is an ecumenical matter.
So this is sort of a follow-up to a topic I did with, I believe, former party members Oshin and Shiv about 4 years ago, where we talked about downtime in games and how certain RPGs, there would be sort of a bit of a game between games, and there were very different takes on it and whether or not this was a good thing. And I just thought it was a sort of topic to perhaps revisit, because it seems to have a broad variety of responses. There seems to be a sort of, there's obviously, as with most things, there's two extremes and then most people are in the middle. But the big thing is, I've noticed a lot of gamers who really like, if they're really passionate about a game, it doesn't matter really what kind of game, they will spend their times between games, like researching. If it's an RPG, they'll be asking for side adventures or downtime activities, or talking to NPCs or for lore. If it's a CCG, they'll be looking up decks. If it's a board game, they'll be on Board Game Geek discussing strategies. And then there are other gamers for whom, the game is the game that we played, and why are we suddenly setting the standard of, I have to do so much extra work between games in order to catch up to everyone else. And they feel it's almost like it's a social pressure rather than an extension of the activity. And when I started thinking about this, it just reminded me of how so many adults, they view the great benefit of being able to learn at their own pace as adults, that they don't have to do homework like they did as children. Now, Owen, as both a gamer who likes to study up on his games and a teacher, what would your point on it be?
Do you want to know what the function of homework is?
By all means.
Homework is about reinforcing lessons. So if you get somebody to practice something in maths, say you do let's say you're doing quadratic equations, your student needs to practice doing them, and the more they do them, the better they will get at doing them. So you give them something to do in class, you teach them how to do it, then you give them something to do in class to help reinforce the lesson, and then you give them more to do at home to help reinforce the lesson. That is the function of homework. It is not always used for that, but that is the function of it. It is learning through getting the student to engage with the content again. And then you are meant to look at it and give feedback to the student based on it. The less homework you give, often the more effective it is, because you actually get a chance to properly give them feedback on it. It's a way of engaging with the game, engaging with the content to learn it better. It's kind of tricky in an RPG because it ends up being functionally different, where you're doing what's called self-directed study, and you're actually expanding your abilities at your own pace, or expanding your knowledge at your own pace. Putting together a build for your character is not homework. It is self-directed study. Because you're expanding. Homework is nearly entirely revision. It is very rarely at the level of schools. Here, go off and learn something new. That's beyond the scope of homework. So I wouldn't really call it homework, because it isn't homework, but it is what you're doing between the game time to expand your abilities at the game. Homework would be something like going and fighting a combat on your own to try and learn how to fight a combat.
Well, solo gaming's a thing.
Yeah, but that would be closer to what homework is. Where, I need to know how my character works a bit better. I'm going to go play I'm going to play D&D on my own to learn how combat actually works. What tactics work in combat. That would be closer to homework.
That is something that some people do.
Yeah.
Some people will sort of math lab their thing. Or maybe sometimes they'll ask the GM, "Oh, can you run a monster for me?" Or some people will just take up the dice, roll them, see what comes out, and just sort of figure out, well, if I spend all my maneuver dice or burn all my high level spells, I get this sort of DPS, but it means I'm tapped out for later. So it can be a lesson in, as I say, the sort of self-directed study, but like I still see this attitude for some people where like particularly in I see a lot of this in LARPs, but you could also see it in like board game clubs where all players start at the same level, but then one or two players will be like sneaking in extra games because they own a copy, and or engaging with the fandom for a game on Board Game Week or the like, and they will skill up much faster. And for some people, that means that rather than they sort of imagine a social contract where we were supposed to learn the same level. The point was to stay on a similar skill level so that we would all enjoy the game at the same pace, but other people are racing ahead because they had more free time or dedicate their free time to just this, and now that's sort of disrupting the game for me. That
I think that would nearly strike me as being unhelpfully insecure to complain that somebody else has put the time in to get better at the game while you were not doing that. I mean, if someone does that, that's how they've spent their time. You didn't have that time to do that. That is, if you didn't have the time, you didn't have the time. Don't, like, you can't be like, you can't get better at it. Like, I mean, man, like you're policing someone else's actions at that point. That's unhealthy.
Again, maybe
it's unhealthy and controlling.
Yeah, maybe I chose a very extreme example there.
I'd go with extreme on that one. Yeah.
Dave?
I've a somewhat less extreme example in mind. It's one that's been knocking around my head on and off since I read it in the venerable Cyberpunk 2020 gem guide called "Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads." That is, in fact, the title. And it's a notion called blue booking. And blue booking seems to be half role-playing, half storytelling, and yeah, it's you're effectively doing solo adventuring, kind of say taking scenes from a character's past and going through them with the GM, and and this and it says it's most often aimed at in downtime or sessions where other people can't make it, so it's just yourself. And the idea is you can round out your character more easily than, say, with the standard Cyberpunk 2020 life path. It does note that, especially if you start ending up giving improvement points for good role playing, that's fine and all, but you could end up in a situation where people are accumulating more and more of that, and they actually, as mentioned, especially if the player is living with the GM or in a relationship with them. And that's more.
That really sounds like a specific criticism.
Yeah, it does sound.
That's like someone who's been in that game and is going, rather than address the issue directly, the next time I'm writing GM advice, I'm going to put a pointed reference about Mark and Lucy's overpowered net hacker.
I wouldn't be surprised. Mark,
I want you to read this passage from the DMG while I stare straight at you.
It's an interesting notion, and it's almost like a proto story game idea, like, because I don't recall seeing something exactly like this sense, but I've seen things that look an awful lot like it.
That was kind of a very 90s idea of like putting together a really developed backstory for your character. I know people who'll still put together kind of 5 or 6 page backstories for their character, and like I've never been huge into that. I've always kind of prepared to have a kind of loose outline for who the character is, maybe a couple of stereotypes about them, and then kind of play more as it goes, you know? I've never really been I've always been a little bit flexible, but I didn't like to set too many hard principles early on, because sometimes you encounter something awkward later on in the character, you're like, oh, well, my character wouldn't do this. And then I often find myself going, well, he wouldn't do this, so he won't do it. And
fair enough.
That can... I've often found, like, this generates ill feeling, so I just won't do it. Because it's like, it's not an invitation to be a prick. Because at one stage I was playing a werewolf LARP, and the GM came to me and asked me to be an NPC for the session, and I was like, yeah, no problem, I'll play the NPC. My guy's off doing something else, grand, I'll play the NPC. And two of the players spent kind of 20 minutes, no, half an hour actually, of game time, slowly pulling a mortal out of the spirit world back into the real world. And my character kind of watched them do it the whole time and was kind of giving unhelpful advice and say, this isn't a great idea, guys. And as soon as they pulled him out of safe, my character aims a sniper rifle and blows your man's head off.
All right.
Like, what? And I said, guys, out of character, I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry. But, they're both, oh yeah, no, that's cool, you know? I was like, because I was immediately like, this is a dick thing to do, but it is exactly what the character would do. And I said, then that's what the character does, you know? And, and I often found, like, if I write a really detailed backstory, I'll get very set about what my character should do. And I'm like, it's often as unintended knock-ons. So I often kind of pull back as a result of that.
Yeah, I varied. I've leaning towards less background. First of all, because I don't really like doing what I would consider homework. And partially because I'd prefer to see the character roll out and play, but occasionally a GM will throw me like a giant questionnaire and I'll start getting ideas. And like that's happened. But my preference is towards a few paragraphs at most, preferably bullet points about a character, as in, as long as I've something to work off, as in I've an idea of their basic personality, how they're going to start coming across to people, and I can build on that and discover things.
I like a generic kind of, maybe a few principles, nothing too rock solid. I actually think the Cyberpunk's life path is actually pretty good, because I've rolled up a few characters using it, and you get a feel for who the person is. At least a little bit, even if it's a little bit contradictory sometimes, you can kind of try and resolve those contradictions. Why? Like, sometimes you end up with a character who's a massive hypocrite, which is always kind of funny. Always kind of funny to play. You know, you're like, okay, this guy does this, and this guy does that. You know, and it's interesting. Sometimes you end up playing a character, and their backstory is pre-selected for you, or you didn't pick it. You can end up with a very interesting character that sometimes is quite difficult to play. In the Darkstrider campaign in Star Wars, I was ending up playing a character, and I noted it was kind of a remorseful ex-Imperial soldier. But I noticed in his backstory, he would continually go, and I will never do something terrible like this again. And then kind of a little bit later would do something terrible. And then was like, oh, never again. I've changed. I'm a different man. And then he's terrible again. And I'm like, this really comes up. I said, this is a difficult character to play for that reason. Because he does do terrible things. And like, is he the reformed guy? He's the guy who says he's the reformed guy and then backslides. And I'm like, is this character just really weak as a person?
Yeah.
Because he always takes the wrong... Is that... And I often go, is that intentional? Is he meant to be this guy who says he's the reformed guy here, the reformed bad guy? But in reality, he's a lot more questionable. And it was interesting. I kind of played him that way towards the end. It was like, he kept doing things that were bad. And then be like, oh, never again. And then he would keep doing it. And then in the end, he redeems himself by dying. And I was like, yeah, that's at least an arc. You know, he doesn't. Yeah. But I was looking at him going, why does he keep doing this? And when I spoke to the GM about it, I said, this guy is not consistent how he's written. You know? There's 3 or 4 instances in which he goes, this was the step too far. And then he goes back to doing the same bad stuff again.
I don't know, sounds consistent enough to me like, when the way you're describing it.
But it can be like, you get that and you go, okay, now that's my character. And that's kind of the homework thing a bit. You sometimes have to think about, how does this character handle this thing? Maybe that's a bit of homework that sometimes hits you with. You ever been like doing something else, thinking about, so how's my character going to handle that? Is he going to be cool about it? Or is he going to be a jerk? How bad is it if I'm a jerk? Because it sometimes can be pretty bad. Like if you decide, you know what, all 4 of you have decided we're doing this thing, my character disagrees, and we're going to do the other thing. And they go, well, we have one note to it. And he goes, okay, guess I'm going behind your back to do it then. And that's interesting. It's to spend your time going outside the game going, do I think about a way to do this behind the other characters' backs? Or do I just ignore it? Or do I go and talk to them and say, alright guys, I'm going to do all this stuff that you deliberately said we're not allowed to do? You know? 'Tis an interesting one to think about. Have you ever spent any time thinking about what your character is going to do in response to X?
Yeah, and okay, like sometimes a lot of the time, like especially if I've had a busy week, I mightn't think so much about what a character's going to do, and I suppose the wheels start re-engaging once I'm sat down at a table or in front of the screen for the next session. Then, oh, that's where we were. Oh, right. One thing it very much depends. Like things like free time, free mental bandwidth, that sort of thing. One thing I will try and do is if I need to do something for a crunchy system, I do try to do that in between, and because that could slow down a game if I'm trying to level up a character like for the first 20 minutes of a session or something. So I'd rather not hold things up like that.
Yeah, and there's this sort of between game stuff can be helpful to a party as a whole, but like the way you described the sort of side session for character development, which is a really interesting idea, but as you said, very 90s. I was thinking back to older styles of gaming, sort of 70s style gaming, where it wasn't assumed that each session that the same party would be there. And you get stories like at Guy Gygax's table, he would have sessions like almost daily sessions with Rob Kuntz, who was the weird kid who lived in his basement, basically. And Rob Kuntz would almost always play with the same character, the infamous Robolar. And this is the character who not only beat the Tomb of Horrors, but unleashed the goddess Zugmoy upon the land. Just because he kept having just these solo adventures on the side. And at the end, an awful lot of people in that campaign were actually rather annoyed at him. They besieged his castle and he had to, I think he had to like just leave the country, which he had a green dragon that he rode around on, so that wasn't that hard.
I thought you meant he had to leave the States because they're going to lynch him.
No, not quite that bad, but his character did have to go into exile. It's just like, but see, that sort of what we might now call extracurricular activity was more expected back then because in the Gygaxian model, it wasn't assumed that each session would be the same party, and thus it was fine for each player to find common time with DM and organize groups, and then obviously by that logic, whatever XP they got doing that was well earned, and therefore there wasn't seen to be a problem that Sir Robolar was level 14 and the average other party member was level 3. They just sort of rolled with that and said, well, he earned it on his own time. I guess he'll just have to find his own sessions, and we'll bomb around with our low-level parties on the first 2 levels of the dungeon. But as gaming developed, the standard became the fixed party every week, and thus giving out different XP for different efforts started becoming more controversial. And again, not to everyone. Some people will say, yeah, like if my character wasn't there, I don't earn XP. That's fine. But other people said, we're a group. Why are we rewarding one person for the vagaries of them having more time? Whereas I have kids, I have a job, I have 2 other hobbies. And that's where this dichotomy came in. And that's why, as games have gone on, there's more and more emphasis on, it's not a character as XP, it's like a XP total for a party has become very much the standard. And this is where... Is
this just because one kid was living in Gary Gygax's basement and grinding stuff more efficiently?
Possibly. That's certainly where the standard was set. That's where D&D got the standard of we're handing out XP for effort, essentially. And as the fandom grew beyond Gary Gygax's bunch of friends with nothing else to do, 5 nights a week, so they come over to Gary's house and play, different philosophies on, how united a party was, how united a game group was week on week became running. And it just was like, some people would say, yes, if effort should be rewarded. And other people saying, well, that's rewarding one person is the same as punishing another. And yeah, you could say it's sort of a vacuous argument and an excuse for not dedicating themselves to the game. But like, as time has gone on and the sanctity of a gaming group has gained some more traction, some people have pushed back against individual effort, and I'm not sure there's a strong, definite answer either way, I guess.
It's interesting because this is the same line of thinking that got us equalizing character levels requirements in 3.5, which was a mistake. Having a wizard be exactly the same, having level 5 wizard require exactly as much XP as level 5 fighter.
I suspect a response to that would be to be more careful in group selection, to have people more or less on the same page, as in, we want to keep things very even for, because we don't want anyone feeling put out. We're all busy, etc., etc. Versus we're going to see where we're going to see where the chips fall and run it like that. And I think trying to blend the two doesn't seem to work out so well because somebody's going to get annoyed.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way to do it, unfortunately, where someone doesn't feel kind of put out. Okay, so, they're getting the advantage and my extra work is now meaningless. If you're the guy, grinding games with Gary Gygax on a Thursday night because he's nothing better to do, he cheesed off. I was like, well, no, everyone gets the same XP. He's like, I put in more effort. And you're like, yes. Now, do I make the choice that favors the majority? Or do I make the choice that favors effort? It definitely feels like something you should discuss with your players.
And of course, people being people, it's going to be not an idiosyncratic group, but the lines will get fuzzy. Say a board game group, they might be perfectly fine, say in a co-op game that someone researches all the rules and gets all the hot strats, whereas some other people, another group might be like, no, this is armchair quarterbacking and one player is dictating the rest of the game to us. I want to learn at my own pace through play, not by checking out forums.
Okay, here's a question then, right? Let's say you're playing a co-op game. Right, and many RPGs are co-op games, but there's other co-op games you can play, and you're playing a decently difficult board game. let's say you're playing Gloomhaven or Arkham Horror LCG or something like that, which requires teamwork and everyone to contribute. If someone is playing a terrible deck or playing a character in a desperately unoptimized format and going, this is the way I want to play, and you're failing because of them, what do you do?
That person's not playing the game they signed up to.
So what do you say then?
I don't think they're being fair on the rest of the players.
Particularly, they're doing it just because they like lining up the tiles in a pretty way, or think it's funny that one card is a clown, one has a honky nose, one card is a conky nose, and the useless combo of honking the nose and the clown pleases them endlessly for some reason. I don't know exactly how Gloomhaven works. I assume there's a clown card as a Kickstarter backer reward.
Or whatever, but I mean, I was watching Destiny last night, and there's basically the computer game, and I had been playing my Wolf Up game, and I came in, and one of the players was streaming the raid, and there were 6 of them doing it, and they were trying to get enough damage together to kill the boss in a tight time window. And I was watching one of the character players, and he was using, who I know, good friend of mine, and he was using 2 primary weapons and 1 heavy weapon, instead of a special weapon which would do more damage. And I was like, dude, put on a special weapon. You know? And he's like, but I don't enjoy that. And I'm like, okay, but you're going to wipe now because you don't kill the boss fast enough. And lo did they wipe, and he put on the special weapon, and they still wiped because they were not doing enough damage. When you have this doesn't happen much in RPGs because RPGs aren't difficult enough, but it does happen in some other games where you sometimes have to have a difficult conversation with your mate about you aren't doing well enough and you need to up your game. You know, and that's hard. But you have to, if you encounter difficult content, you sometimes have to make people do homework and say you have got to go away and put together a better build. Your build is not good enough. And because we are not being GM by GM who can dynamically adjust the difficulty, that there is a bar to performance, you must now go away and get better.
And then some people will turn around saying they don't like having so much content wrapped around a skill wall. They'd rather have it wrapped around a sort of time investment wall. And say like they walk around with their heavy weapon and their 2 primaries killing mobs, and they sort of hope for a drop. And like I can sort of see both sides in this, because I know that, you know, if you're playing a raid, you need to play to the mechanics of a raid like that, because that's the point of the raid. But also I sympathize with people who are like, I didn't get into this for learning specific mechanics. I got into this for the grind. But yeah, but
that's unfortunately not how. If you want to mail the game developers and say, I want to make this easier so I don't have to try so hard, you know, absolutely, you know, that's your right. But and the difficulty is with any group activity. Like if it's solo activity, just do it yourself or do it your own pace. That's grand. But when you've got something that can only be done by 6 people or 10 people or 25 people or 40 people, people have to work together and do that bit of homework and go on to Elitist Jerks or go on to Icy Veins or go on to whatever Reddit or go on to whatever strategy thing you're and do a bit of homework to get your stuff, get those numbers up, you know? I mean, have any of you had that experience in a game? Having to basically go, you need to go off and get better. Have you ever had to have that discussion with somebody?
Yeah, like ended up having to discuss spell choices at various points. Because I remember on one occasion we almost got fried because our blaster mage only had fire spells, and we went up against a red dragon. So all said blasting spells were utterly useless. So I think they learned a lesson from that incident.
Yeah, and that's grand, but like, have you ever had to take someone aside and go, right, you're not doing well enough, you need to do better? Which is a very difficult conversation to have. Because everyone wants to do that at their own stage and basically, I'm going to do this my way. I'm like, yeah, but your way sucks. I need to find a nice way to say that. difficult one. It's not easy. And I mean, that's a part of homework is going up. Like, when you go up a build optimization, going off and figuring out a good build for your character is fun for some people. Other people find it like hell and like, oh, I don't want to play that way. I want to play it my own way. I don't want to follow somebody else's recommendations. But if you're any good at optimizing, you know that reading someone's recommendations is the start of putting together a build. Where you go, okay, what is everyone talking about as if it's really good? This feat. All right, let's take a look at that feat. Okay, I can kind of see why that works well. Now, how can I put this together with what I'm using? And that's part of it. It's not as simple as that. Some people go online, they one for one recreate Pun Pun. And then it doesn't work because the GM goes, that's stupid, you can't do that. And other people are like, okay, what's overpowered for its cost? This is, and this is. Okay, I'm going to take a Celerity 5 on my Bruja, and I'm going to see how much fun I have. And oh wow, you have a ton of fun, and the other people don't. You know, that's part of gaming, is going doing a bit of research and putting together stuff that maybe you find mechanically interesting, or maybe you find broken or able to trivialize content with. I've had stuff sometimes that I picked up and I didn't use once until a certain point late in the game, and I was like, I'm going to now use this ability or this spell, and we're going to win this fight, and then the GM will ban it, but we'll win that fight. You know? And I've done that in games. I've had and the GM said, you know I was going to ban this after this. I said, yes. I had that factored in as a possibility. Yes. But it won us that fight, so I'm good. And doing that extra homework is fun for me. I can see why it would not be fun for other people. But it's fun for me, you know?
Yeah, well, there's the unspoken social what shouldn't be an unspoken social contract, because there really ought to be at least a session 0 where people's assumptions kind of get put on the table. And like if you've one person who's like power build, like creating powerful builds, and nobody else is, because that's not the sort of game they have in mind, there's going to be problems down the line. They're pretty much unavoidably at that stage.
Well, now that we're discussing, talking about the problem with reasonable adults, I'd actually like to try to go beyond that usual ending point, and come back to something that Owen mentioned earlier, which is the concept of feedback being important for the sort of extracurricular activity. Well, we can theorize and psychoanalyze the straw men of this argument and say that a lot of the people who maybe don't like playing, doing extra study between games, maybe don't have a good background of that feedback coming from their effort. But I guess I'm curious, is like, have
you ever given feedback, Shane?
Not as often as I probably should, because I have a suspicion that the act of giving feedback is a life skill in itself.
It is. It's a great way to deeply upset somebody. You can say something that's very honest and excellent feedback, and the person just gets incredibly upset because it strikes or realizes an insecurity. And I mean, by the way, your character's terrible, right? That you're like the most incompetent rogue I've ever seen. You have gotten rid of the one bit that makes rogue good in favor of a feat that does nothing. And I mean, you really should just start over. And which is very accurate feedback, but is like devastating to the person. When you're giving feedback, you have to do this, the feedback sandwich, which is you tell them something good, you tell them a very short piece of bad news, and then you tell them something good again, and you have to keep doing that the whole time, and they will completely obsess about the bit they told them was bad a lot of the time. So it's you giving feedback to your players about their performance from an external point of view is a very valuable thing to do for the players, but it's a very tricky thing to do for the GM because it's very easy to upset people. because people are very sensitive about kind of being externally assessed. You'll see a ton of stuff in RPG circles where there's no wrong way to play, and everything's valid. And no, there are wrong ways to play. There absolutely are. But do we want to go there? Do you want to get into this group is manifestly less effective than this other group? You know, would you like me to explain all your inadequacies, why they are there? And that's hard, man. That is hard stuff to get through. And it's important to kind of try to reflect on it in a positive manner if you get feedback, but it's still hard for people. Unquestionably difficult.
One thing I would wonder is if the games we play themselves could give better feedback loops to sort of encourage people to try, better play styles. Because often
that's how a lot of games are actually kind of structured. Where you get kind of an introduction to the combat mechanics with a simple fight, and then a slightly more difficult fight, and then a much harder fight. And you're meant to develop your skills as it goes through, so you're able to handle the much tougher fight. Now, in reality, that's kind of, you're meant to learn, flanking is important, or, intimidation is important, or, this is important. And the players require a certain basic level of competence to comprehend or make critical assessments about why they're succeeding and failing. And a GM who understands the system well can explain to them why what they're doing is succeeding or failing. For example, one of my GMs in Pathfinder 2nd Ed will tell us, for example, when an attack hit because of a flank. So that hit because of the flank, or that crit because of the flank, or that hit because of the flank and the intimidation. So it's reminding players this is the good tactics to use. And if you look at, say, for example, Pathfinder 2nd Ed, which is one of the few fairly difficult RPGs to play, you go on the threads and it'll occasionally be help my players are losing in combat, and there will be a laundry list of this is the things you can do to make this easier. Savage Worlds had a giant cheat sheet published because sometimes Savage Worlds combat was going to be could be a bit frustrating, and they're literally explaining this is how you this is your cheat sheet. You're not hitting, try wild attack. You're not damaging, try wild attack. You're basically you can't shake the guy with your damage. Try agility trick, or try smart, whatever. Basically, these are the tools you can use to try and get ahead of somebody who you can't beat by just hitting them. And that's useful. But the GM needs to be more skilled than the players to give that feedback, because they can appreciate why the players are losing. Sometimes you have to go afterwards. Guys, you got hosed in that fight because you were told this guy is resistant to magic, and you insist on blasting spells on him. And it did not work out for you. And you need a certain degree of he's very high AC. You need to basically approach this differently, or you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, and I've seen in some older games, sort of the tendency was to tell the DM to hide this kind of information because it was meant to be the players were supposed to, figure out themselves, but that meant an awful lot of players weren't getting the feedback they needed to learn. So it sort of became counterproductive. And I guess there's only so much a game can demonstrate its mechanics without a game master or someone who really knows the rules of a board game. Do you think it's easier or harder to do this sort of feedback loop in a competitive game? Like have you...
Yep. Okay. What form is my opponent in after the game? That's the first question. If someone's annoyed, there's no point.
Yeah, they're not going to listen.
They're not going to listen. Like I've done. Okay, so what happened there was I've done this. I said if they're in a receptive mood, I can go. So the reason I won that was X, and that can be a valuable learning experience for somebody. To be useful, often it needs to be kind of within a. You need to be within a. You need to be close enough in skill, or you need to be very, very good and able to explain yourself, which is a different skill, really. Is kind of going, you know the way you play that monster and you put 3 enchantments on him and he was really good, and then I played Murder and your game plan fell apart? Yeah, don't do that. You know? The deck you're playing is cool, but in this environment, single target removal is very good. And you just let me take away 4 of your cards for 1 of my card. And if you're a good Magic player, I mean, you have to be very nice, explain that to somebody who doesn't understand what just happened. It's like you let me take away 4 cards with 1 card. And try to avoid that happening. Is basically the advice you would get. You know? Dies to removal. Being an L joke. If you look at giving feedback, you need to be able to give it in a way that people can understand, and in neither a condescending manner nor in a way that they can't understand. So you need to be good at explaining yourself, and the person needs to be receptive. And you just said, okay, so the way my deck works is this, and you kind of walked into that, and that's why you lost. I've had games where basically someone was very sore after I beat them. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, you know, if they want to talk later, I'll talk to them. And often I'll talk to someone about a game, but we can have a discussion about, yeah, I got lucky there or the thing. And you often it can be very difficult because some people just blame their luck. And sometimes I'm guilty of it. But generally speaking, when I'm complaining about my luck, I genuinely got a bit unlucky. And the duty there is to sympathise with the person's luck and then move on from the conversation. You can sometimes somebody genuinely wants to learn goes, why did you beat me like that? You know? And it's stuff like, I was watching someone play the game and he's like, your man throws hands out, I can't win this game. And I go, no, you can. Because it's just a friendly game. I was like, okay. He goes, well, how do I do? I said, okay, look at him. He's playing Ninja. Basically, item deck. He's got 6 cards left in hand. 3 of them are items to attach. 1 of them is probably something, an honor meta card. And the player playing it picked up 3 cards from his hand and put them down in the deck. 1 of them was an honor meta card. He picked up 2 cards, put them down in his deck. I said, okay, he's actually only got 1 battle action. So if you can count up what he has on the board versus what you have, you can actually figure out how well you can do. But that requires you to understand the environment, understand the matchup, and understand everything else. That's good feedback to a high-skill player. To a lower-skill player, that's like, how do I know all that? It's like, you'll get there, but you're not there yet. So it needs to be equivalent skill stuff. You need to be within kind of a space of skill to give feedback in some cases. If you're good enough, you can adjust yourself down in skill a bit and go, you need to play like this. Or I need to explain to you how to play this in a kind of a simpler fashion. And that's demanding, but it's good if you can do it. But again, the person needs to be receptive. If the person is annoyed at the end of the game because they lost, you were both trying to win and you won and they lost, they may not want to hear it. They may want to go off and cool off. Because competitive, people becoming a little more aggressive while competitive is absolutely a thing that happens. So, you know.
Yeah, and there's always so much a game designer can do to put that in. I think maybe board games have the advantage there because they can put sort of feedback on the board. I can think of like games where once you buy something, there's a little picture underneath showing the bonus you got.
Yeah.
And that sort of visual thing is like, oh, my action caused this to happen.
Yeah.
Thus I know better how that affects the game. But that's harder to do with CCG and a lot harder to do with an RPG, where things become more abstract and more mathematical, and it becomes more reliant on GMs.
Have you ever been playing a game and then gone, lost horribly, and then gone, okay, and gone back for some external feedback from online, hit the FAQs, hit the forums, hit Reddit, and go, how do we beat X?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's homework again. And you do that why? Because you can't figure out why. You haven't developed the skills enough to know, okay, we're losing because of X. Go, okay, what do we do to deal with this? And sometimes you will get unhelpful help, and sometimes you will get very helpful help. It all depends, right?
The internet has all things in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever gone on and be like, I can't beat this, go online, get 2 good hints, go back and ruffle stomp it? Like, I've definitely had that experience.
Yeah, a small change can be enough to make a huge difference, yeah.
Like, sometimes, like, you're thinking these 2 things are really important, it's actually this third thing that's killing you, so deal with that. And the rest of it will become a lot easier. And it's sometimes like, you play a game and you're like, why are we losing so bad? And you're like, okay, I think what we need to do is make sure that this threshold doesn't get too high, because then this penalty is too much, and then we keep failing. Which is very much the case if you can actively consider, okay, what was actually killing us in that game? And it can be useful after a few minutes on any game to go, okay, guys, why did we get our asses kicked there? What was actually the problem? Were we rolling badly, or was there actually a real issue? And you could be like, we were out of healing spells. Like, yeah, we definitely need a bit more healing in the tank. And then you basically maybe strategize a bit more. Have you had experience like that, Dave? Ever like, okay, we are not good enough at dealing with X. We need to get better at it.
I can't think of a specific example, but that sounds like it's probably not an uncommon experience.
I know I tend to dive into theory crafting when I was more of a Magic player. I would look up this, deck archetypes, sort of soak in the bit of the strategies of the time, discuss those with people, and look online for articles to sort of explaining broad concepts like mana flooding and a thing. But mostly I learned through play and having discussions with my peers as we played. I learned an awful lot through tournaments where I got upset that I was low in the rankings, but didn't consider it a deal breaker.
Yeah, some people generally don't mind not doing terribly well. Other people are incredibly bothered by it. Depends on the person. In a tangible way.
I can think of examples where I've rage quit after, but I've seen it more often than others. Like, and it can be a bit of a problem for people with a temper because, well, they're probably not going to dwell on why exactly they lost. If they're just getting angry.
Thinking about why you lost is difficult, and some people do not like to do it. They're just like, ugh, that was just rubbish, Where in reality, no, there's something you learn there about why you lost. But it's difficult. I mean, if you play Blood Bowl at all, have you ever played Blood Bowl?
I haven't, no.
I've played once or twice.
Blood Bowl is a punishing game.
It's all about risk management, and there's no certainty. So you will. I actually was talking about this just the other day, where people were saying like, "Oh, you only get so many." The party recently changed the rules so that you can use as many re-rolls on a roll as you want, and this is causing a lot of new people with sunk cost fallacies to waste all their re-rolls on single, relatively minor throws because it's that this is a small part of. There's a small part of the game why am I losing, and they spend all the rerolls, and then they have nothing for the clutch plays in the late game.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the thing there is like but yeah, it's about this risk management and thinking about the entire game, not a single play. And those are difficult. Those are skills you have to sort of train yourself in. And that's probably why some people absolutely love Blood Bowl and have played it for 30 years, and some people can't stand it because it seems to them very random and unfair.
Yeah, two mutuals of the show actually. One person is a Blood Bowl vet, like a 25-year person, has been playing Blood Bowl that long, kind of knows the game very well. Somebody else was playing Blood Bowl. They're playing the league online, and he played a game and said, "Hey, could you take a look? I recorded my game. Can you take a look at it and just give me some feedback on me playing?" And he played 90 seconds of the game. And the person watching said, "Stop that record, playback for a second." He says, "Okay, you've made 20 major mistakes so far." That's good feedback, but it's going to be rough to take.
20?
Yes.
Damn.
He counted them out. He said, "You've made 20 mistakes so far."
God, yeah, that's... I imagine that would be tough to take, but... Yeah,
and all of the critiques are going to be valid. That's what's worse.
Well, he lived.
It's
from
just
the
going to be like
first.
you've made that. Yeah, and I mean that's the feedback's difficult like that, man. Feedback's difficult.
Yeah, although the idea that nowadays we have, at least for digital board games, we have the ability to do that sort of replay ability is very useful for video games, and video games are making leaps and strides in sort of tutorializing, teaching mechanics and making games more as accessible as possible for players of all skill levels. But the tools to do so in a lot of games are more limited and rely a lot more on social skill, essentially. And so what a lot of people are finding is that maybe they need feedback on their teaching methods.
Yeah. What's the longest you spent getting a character ready?
Did Dave, that time you ran like a 15th level a game in late game 3.5. I think we had 2 sessions of just character creation.
Yeah, 3.5 is like that, especially high level 3.5.
Yeah, it was like the last year of releases, and it was like 15th level, and we had full magical gear. I think I took an entire session to make the character, and another session to choose all their gear.
3.5
with
is very
homework
heavy.
between the 2 sessions. Yeah, and that's with homework between the 2 sessions. So
the longest I've done, I once spent most of a day over at a friend's house. I was the only person making a character at that stage for Middle Earth role-playing game, and it was most of the day to to get that character sorted because there was so many roles and so many tables. Rollmaster is pretty crunchy, as it turns out. Like the game MERP is based off of. The other contenders would probably be various forum games where people were coming up with very elaborate house rules. Say like Gestalt and like getting bonus feats and all sorts of much wackier things thrown in. So you could be a bit of time trying to go over a bit, like a character build to figure out, does this actually hang together? But yeah, it's you can, like, especially for cruncher systems or for systems with a lot of options like 3.5 or Pathfinder, you can spend a lot of time at it if you have a mind to.
Oh, absolutely. I once spent a solid day and a half. We had playing in a long-running Star Wars game, and we'd gone through 3 of the D20 Star Wars editions. We'd gone through the Star Wars D20, Star Wars Revised, and then our characters went away, and we shifted to SAG edition. We played with some different characters for a bit as part of the Darkstrider campaign. And then my Jedi, who had been a combat legend, was coming back at 15th level. He was showing back up in the campaign.
All right.
And I was like, okay, this will not stand for him to be less than amazing. And at this stage, 13 source books are out. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to figure this one out. Because they were kind of saying, oh, your character's been heavily balanced by this. And I'm like, we originally did this with just the core book. There are now 13 source books. Get back to me when there's a few source books out. And I go off for a day and a half, and felt a very productive day and a half, reading the forums and then pulling out all the books and reading them carefully. And at the end of that, did I have something that was shocking terrible to have to fight. It was great. Just great. So good. So good.
Yeah. No, to be fair, you don't want a massive amount of dissonance between what a character ought to be capable of and what they are capable of. Whether that's like reducing expectations or squeezing the build for as much mechanical power as possible is another question.
But that was part of a 7-year-long campaign, so everyone in the group was very used to your character being absolutely disgusting.
Well, by the end of the revised thing, there was a point at which they were like, okay, if we got into a fight with your character versus all 5 of our characters, what would happen, Owen? And I said, I'd kill you all. And they were like, huh. And I said, that doesn't make us feel great. I said, I don't know what to tell you. That's the way it is. And it was that then we did a rebalance and we're in Saga and it was like, there's less options, so my character's less good. But coming on to when they did the new one and they put out the Jedi Academy source book, I was like, okay, cool. I now have the tools to be great again. Awesome. Now I'll go be great again. And that was, all of a sudden I was back to being pretty dangerous, including a memorable bit where we were fighting kind of basically 7 equivalents to our characters. One of the other guys turned over and said, can you beat 2 of these guys? And I said, probably. And he said, good, because you're going to have to kill mine for me. That's how I did that. So yeah. But that was fun. But I find that fun. I find building a powerful character fun. Not everyone does. Some people just pick the same stuff all over again. It's like, I'll just keep picking the most bog standard option because I'm not interested in this aspect of the game. I'm not interested in doing extra work. And that's just how they find fun out of it.
Yeah, and it seems at the end of the day our conclusion is talk to your players, know your players, get good at making the game suit the players and make the players suit the game. And unfortunately you have to come down to the on the side of you got to put the work in, either yourself personally for your own playing skill or as a side as a sort of games facilitator to make sure that the games you want have the right level of engagement for the game group you have. I think that's unfortunately the side you have to come down on. It's pretty conclusive.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen, beyond that?
If the issues raised in this podcast affected you or anyone you know, please contact us at our Discord or at our Twitter or at email.
Assuming you can put in the extra work to contact us on our email or Discord. But regardless of that, this party's over, but the feedback session has only just begun.
Thank you for listening to the Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.